minutes in Lafayette Park. Well, our next guest this evening spent 3 months as acting director of national intelligence, and for that, the nation is indebted to him. In that short time, he declassified a number of Obama officials, unmasking General Michael Flynn. He forced the release of all 53 interview transcripts from the House Intel Committee on, remember that, Russian collusion, declassified Susan Rice's email to herself about Flynn, and declassified notes from the Justice Department Inspector General's report on FISA abuse. I'm pleased to say joining us tonight is Ric Grenell, and it is great to have you with us, Ric, and congratulations and our thanks for all that you have done for your country as ambassador and as DNI. It's good to see you. Let's start with the Attorney General talking about the prospect of names we're familiar with coming up in Durham's investigation. Your reaction?
Look, I think Attorney General Barr is doing a great job. I got to work very closely with him. He's very thorough. He's looking at the facts and letting the facts determine the case. We clearly had a problem, Lou, and I think people are beginning to realize that the red flags that were raised early, and this is a very key point that people need to understand, the red flags that were raised early on in the Russian investigation, red flags from career officials at FBI and the CIA and other intelligence agencies saying that this was something that they shouldn't pursue, that seemed to be trumped up, that had really dubious claims with the Steele dossier. All of these red flags were pushed aside. They were done through the bureaucratic task of classifying these comments, pushing people aside. And frankly, when I saw it, I was very sad for our country because I couldn't believe that the voices that were saying from the beginning, slow down, this doesn't seem right, this is wrong, this isn't the whole story. All of those voices were silenced and pushed away, and yet the people who clearly had political motivations to fan the flames and to make the situation much nastier than what it really was, those voices were the only voices out there. And so when I was inside and looking at this information, I was saddened because the American people didn't get to see the full story. They got half the story. They got a little piece, and that little piece was really disingenuous to the truth. And so I think it's important. I think the American people deserve to have information. And what I wanted to do was to systematically go through and declassify the information that was from the beginning, that was used to start this Russian investigation, and let the American people see the facts. And it's shocking to see how many of these transcripts and many of these footnotes and specific pieces of information were pushed aside and not given the light, because frankly, if they had been given the light, if they had been given voice, the narrative would have fallen apart rather quickly, I think, as we saw some DOJ officials say, let's collapse this case. There is no case here, and yet it continued.
Would you not also agree that this effort by the deep state, if you will, referencing both the intelligence community, specifically the Department of Justice, the FBI, could not have proceeded without a symbiotic relationship of evil, in my view, between the radical Dems, who were so politically motivated and lusting for power and frustrated at the election of this president, that they worked with those agents within the intelligence community and with the FBI and the Department of Justice in league with a complicit national left-wing media. Without all of those characters in position and playing their roles, it just could not have been carried out successfully.
Look, I think what you're touching on is the culture of Washington, D.C., and I think that you hit it on the head. We have a real problem. Right now, we do not have a fight between Republicans and Democrats. That traditional fight has given us great policy issues. Many would argue when you're in the center, you get this kind of majority movement towards progress. And we don't have that fight anymore, Lou. What we have is a permanent bureaucracy in Washington, and I include the media in that. Washington versus the rest of America. When you go to Washington, D.C., and you live there, then you can get a job in one of these bureaucracies. Why do we have all of the federal government, or at least by far the majority of the federal government bureaucracies, based in Washington, D.C.? I don't think it's healthy. I think we saw with COVID. It's not healthy when there's a pandemic. There's a whole bunch of problems that we can unpack here, but clearly when the media live in Washington, D.C., when the bureaucracy lives in Washington, D.C., they fight for their city. They have a sports team now, and they are very proud of this city, and they therefore are not going to be able to be a check and a balance on the growth of the capital, so to speak. And the American people have to understand that Donald Trump, when he was elected, he talked about changing the culture, changing the way that it's done. And this was an affront to the people in Washington, D.C. They did two things. One, almost 70 Democrats refused to show up at the peaceful transition of power. Now, right. Lou, I worked at the State Department for 11 years. If that happened in another country, we would call it out. We would say, grow up and go to the inauguration. Go to the process and show that you can be peaceful. We had almost 70 Democrats, sitting members, completely say that they're not even showing up. We have a problem in Washington, and I think Donald Trump put his finger on it, and they are lashing out against him because of it.
And we have, let's be straightforward, we have an Obama problem. Members of his administration unmasking, amongst others, General Michael Flynn. I know you've got some strong views about unmasking and what did occur, and we'll take that up with Ric Grenell as we continue the conversation in just a few moments. Stay with us. We'll